6 Messerschmitt fighters spiraled toward the Earth in less than 90 seconds. Their pilots never saw what killed them. They scanned the sky the way they had been trained. They checked their 6 o'clock. They watched the bomber formations above them. They followed doctrine perfectly. And still they died. The American pilot who shot them down was not faster than they were. His aircraft was not more powerful. He had not discovered a new maneuver or some revolutionary weapon. He had simply become invisible. His P-51 Mustang carried a paint scheme so strange and so counterintuitive that enemy pilots looked straight at him and saw nothing but empty sky. The question was simple. How do you hide a fighter aircraft in broad daylight? Spring, 1944. The skies over Western Europe belong to everyone and no one. American bombers fly daily missions deep into Germany. Hundreds of aircraft crossing the channel, climbing toward altitude, forming massive aerial streams that stretch for miles across the sky. Their targets are factories, rail yards, oil refineries, anything that keeps the German war machine alive. The Luftwaffe rises to meet them. German interceptors climb through clouds and contrails, forming attack groups that wait along the bomber route. When the American formations appear, the fighters dive in at incredible speed, firing cannons into the bomber boxes before climbing away to strike again. It is a brutal war of altitude, range, and timing. Bomber crews die by the hundreds. Escort fighters push farther each week, burning fuel they can barely spare just to protect the bombers for a few more miles over hostile territory. Then the P-51 Mustang arrives. With long-range drop tanks and the Packard-built Merlin engine, the Mustang can escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It climbs quickly, dives faster than almost anything in the sky, and turns well enough to challenge German fighters on equal terms. American pilots begin to believe something they had barely dared imagine before. They might actually win the air war. But belief does not solve the fundamental problem of fighter combat. You can outfly the enemy. You can outshoot the enemy. But first, you must see the enemy. And in aerial combat, seeing first is often the difference between life and death. Fighter pilots learn early that the sky is a deceptive place. Objects appear suddenly out of nowhere. A distant aircraft can vanish against clouds or haze. Sunlight can hide an attacker until the last possible moment. Pilots crane their necks constantly, scanning the sky in practiced patterns. High left, high right, directly above, behind the formation. They know that the one place they fail to check might be the place from which the enemy appears. And even when you spot him, he might already be lining up his guns. The standard American P-51 in 1944 wears olive drab paint over neutral gray. It is a scheme developed before the war. Dark on top to blend with the ground when viewed from above. Light underneath to blend with the sky when seen from below. On paper it makes sense. In practice it creates a problem. Most aerial combat in Europe happens between 20,000 and 30,000 feet. At those altitudes the ground is far below and often hidden by clouds. Pilots spend almost all their time watching the sky around them. And against the pale blue haze of the upper atmosphere, the dark olive drab Mustang becomes a perfect silhouette. German pilots can see it from miles away. They choose when to attack. They control the fight before the American pilot even knows they are there. One pilot begins to notice this problem more than most. He is a captain flying with the 8th Air Force. He is not a reckless fighter ace or a daring show-off. He does not chase glory or fame. Instead, he watches. He studies. He pays attention to small details others overlook. He begins to notice how aircraft appear against the sky. He watches Mustangs flying in formation beside him and sees how the dark fuselage stands out against the bright haze of high altitude. He watches how the wings create sharp outlines against clouds. He notices that when a Mustang turns away, it becomes a dark speck that immediately draws the eye. And slowly a dangerous idea begins to form. The color of his aircraft might be helping the enemy find him. The captain grew up far from cities, in a place where the sky stretched endlessly across the horizon. There were no factories, no smoke, no bright lights, just open air and long sight lines. As a boy, he learned to judge distance by eye. He learned to notice small movements against still backgrounds. Those instincts would follow him into the cockpit years later. He was not wealthy. He had no special connections. Like most American pilots during the war, he earned his place through aptitude tests, relentless training, and the desperate need of a nation at war. He passed the exams. He survived flight school. And he learned to fly the P-51 Mustang at dusty training fields across the American South. Instructors drilled the fundamentals into him again and again. Energy management, formation discipline, gunnery, situational awareness. They taught him to think in 3 dimensions. They taught him how to kill efficiently. But no one ever suggested he question the paint on his aircraft. When he arrives in England in early 1944, the 8th Air Force has already become something enormous. Hundreds of bombers, dozens of fighter groups, entire skies filled with aircraft heading east toward Germany. He joins a squadron that has already lost pilots. He sleeps in bunks that once belonged to men who never returned. He flies aircraft that have been repaired after combat. Their names remain painted on the fuselage, even though the men who chose them are gone. War has a way of erasing people quickly. On his first long-range escort mission into Germany, the reality of the air war becomes clear. Black bursts of flak explode around the bomber formations. German fighters dive from the sun. Radio chatter turns into frantic shouting. The captain fires at a Focke-Wulf that flashes across his gun sight. The enemy aircraft rolls and disappears into cloud. Maybe it crashes. Maybe it escapes. There is no time to know. But something about that moment stays with him. Not the violence. Not the gunfire. The moment just before the attack. The instant when the enemy fighter seemed to appear from nowhere. Later, back at the airfield, he replays the encounter in his mind. Where had the aircraft been? Why hadn't he seen it sooner? He begins paying closer attention. He studies the sky during every mission. He watches the color of clouds, the brightness of sunlight, the way aircraft disappear against haze at high altitude. And eventually he realizes something simple. Camouflage may not be about blending into the ground at all. Maybe it should blend into the sky itself. If the sky at altitude is pale blue and gray, then maybe the fighter should be too. Not dark, not green, not brown, but light, very light, almost the same color as the empty sky around it. The captain knows the idea sounds strange. He knows official channels would take months to approve such a change, if they approved it at all. So he decides to test the theory the only way a fighter pilot can. By risking his life. First he must convince his crew chief. Then he must find the paint. And finally, he must prove that a simple change in color can make a deadly machine disappear into the sky. The search for the right paint begins quietly. Depot warehouses are full of olive drab paint, but almost nothing in the pale gray shade he imagines. Supply officers shake their heads. It isn't standard issue. But after days of searching and a few favors traded quietly between mechanics and supply sergeants, the captain finally finds something close. Not aircraft paint, not a finished color, just pale gray primer meant to go underneath other coatings. It isn't durable. It isn't designed for combat aircraft. But it is exactly the color he needs. The experiment is about to begin. And if he is wrong, the next German pilot who sees him coming will have a perfect target. The paint they finally find is not military issue. It is not designed for aircraft at all. It is simply pale gray primer, normally used as an undercoat before the real paint is applied. Thin, rough, temporary. But the color is perfect. It is almost white, yet not bright enough to shine. It carries a faint blue-gray tone that matches the washed-out haze of the high European sky. To the captain, it looks almost exactly like the background he disappears into every time he flies above 20,000 feet. Now he just needs to see if the theory works. They wait for the right moment. A maintenance day when the weather is too poor for flying. Low clouds roll across the airfield and rain sweeps across the runways. Most of the squadron remains inside the barracks or maintenance buildings. The captain's crew chief gathers a small team of mechanics. No announcements. No paperwork. No official permission. They roll the Mustang into a maintenance hangar and begin stripping the olive drab paint from the fuselage. The sanding takes hours. Slowly, the dark camouflage disappears, revealing the smooth aluminum skin beneath. When the surface is clean, they apply the pale gray primer in thin coats. They work quickly, hoping the paint will dry before anyone important notices what they are doing. By the next morning, the Mustang looks completely different. It looks wrong. It looks unfinished. The pale gray primer gives the aircraft the appearance of something still waiting for its final coat of paint. Pilots walking past the aircraft stop and stare. One laughs and asks if the captain forgot to finish painting his fighter. Another asks if maintenance ran out of olive drab. The captain simply shrugs. It's finished, he says. Let's see what happens. The first mission after the repaint comes quickly. Bomber escort. Target, Magdeburg, Germany. Weather, clear skies, unlimited visibility. Exactly the kind of day when enemy fighters will be waiting. The captain takes off with his flight. Four Mustangs climb together into the cold morning air. 3 of them wear the traditional olive drab paint. 1 is pale gray. They climb to altitude and join the bomber formation as hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses stretch across the sky like a slow-moving metal river. Then they turn east. Germany waits beyond the horizon. At 20,000 feet, the captain begins to notice something. When he glances at his own wing, the aircraft no longer looks like a dark shape against the sky. Instead, it blends into the haze. Not perfectly, not completely invisible, but the pale gray paint softens the outline of the aircraft. The sharp silhouette that normally draws the eye is gone. The Mustang becomes something vague, something easy to overlook. Just another piece of sky. The captain wonders whether enemy pilots will see the same thing. He does not have to wait long to find out. The attack comes an hour into the mission. German fighters appear suddenly from the north. Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving toward the bomber stream. American fighters break formation immediately to intercept. The sky dissolves into chaos. Engines roar. Aircraft dive and climb in tight turns. The captain pulls hard on the stick as the Mustang accelerates into the fight. A German fighter flashes across his gun sight. He fires. The Messerschmitt breaks left and dives away. The engagement is just beginning. Then something unexpected happens. Another Bf-109 crosses directly in front of him. The range is less than 1,000 yards. Close enough that any trained pilot should instantly see the threat. But the German pilot does not react. No turn, no dive, no defensive maneuver. The aircraft continues flying straight ahead, as if the pale gray Mustang simply is not there. The captain closes the distance calmly. He centers the gun sight. He fires a short burst. The .50 caliber rounds tear across the Messerschmitt's fuselage. The fighter shudders violently. The canopy pops open. The German pilot bails out. The aircraft rolls inverted and begins its long fall toward the earth. Seconds later, another German fighter appears. The situation repeats itself. The enemy pilot does not see the attack coming. The captain fires again. The Messerschmitt erupts in smoke and flame. Then another fighter. And another. The entire engagement lasts less than 90 seconds. 4 German fighters fall from the sky. Maybe 5. In the chaos of the fight, the captain loses count. Later, intelligence officers reviewing the gun camera film will confirm 4 victories. But what matters more than the number of kills is what the captain realizes in that moment. The enemy pilots never saw him. They looked straight toward his aircraft, and their eyes slid past it. When the mission ends and the squadron returns to England, the flight line becomes crowded. Pilots gather around the pale gray Mustang. They watch the engagement from above. They saw the captain carve through the German formation almost untouched. They want to know what happened. They want to know how he did it. The captain simply points at the paint. That's the difference, he says. They couldn't see me. Some pilots remain skeptical. They think it was luck. They think the captain simply flew better that day. But others start asking their crew chiefs a simple question. Do we have any gray paint? The squadron commander hears about the incident. At first he is doubtful. Paint doesn't win dogfights, he says. Training does. Discipline does. But he agrees to review the gun camera footage. When the film is projected onto the screen, the room grows quiet. The camera shows German fighters flying straight ahead, unaware. Then the pale gray Mustang enters the frame. Gunfire. Smoke. Another aircraft falling from the sky. Again and again the same pattern repeats. Enemy fighters simply fail to react until it is too late. The commander watches the footage twice. Then he gives an order. Repaint 2 more Mustangs. Within weeks the number grows. 4 aircraft. Then 8. Eventually the entire squadron begins flying pale gray fighters. Other squadrons notice. Questions begin spreading through the 8th Air Force. Within months the experiment becomes something larger. Something official. Something that begins quietly changing the way American fighters appear in the sky. Pilots begin calling the pale aircraft ghost planes. The name spreads quickly. Ghost fighters. Aircraft that appear from nowhere. Machines that enemy pilots fail to see until the guns open fire. The paint does not make them invincible. Bullets still kill. Engines still fail. Pilots still die. But the pale gray color buys something priceless in aerial combat. Time. 1 second. Maybe 2. Just enough to aim. Just enough to fire first. And in a dogfight, those seconds can mean the difference between life and death. By the summer of 1944, the 8th Air Force begins recommending lighter camouflage for high-altitude fighters. Not an official order. Not yet. But the idea spreads anyway. Depots begin mixing lighter paints. Factories begin experimenting with different finishes. Soon another solution appears that works almost as well. Bare aluminum. Polished metal skin that reflects the pale sky. Lighter. Simpler. Easier to maintain. And nearly as difficult to see as the pale gray primer. The captain continues flying missions in his ghost-colored Mustang. He survives 20 more sorties. He adds victories to his record. And he notices something else. The casualty lists begin to shrink. Not dramatically. Not instantly. But enough that fewer bunks remain empty. Enough that fewer names disappear from the squadron roster. The experiment that began quietly in a maintenance hangar is becoming something bigger. Something that will quietly reshape the way American fighters are painted for the rest of the war. But the captain himself never considers it revolutionary. To him, it was simply common sense. If the enemy cannot see you, he cannot shoot you. As the war continued through 1944, American aircraft began appearing in the skies over Europe with lighter and lighter finishes. Some squadrons preferred the pale blue-gray camouflage inspired by the captain's experiment. Others abandoned camouflage entirely and flew with bare aluminum skins, polished metal reflecting the high-altitude haze. Both solutions worked for the same reason. Against the washed-out sky above Europe, dark colors created contrast. Light colors erased it. The exact shade mattered less than the principle behind it. Visibility was everything. Camouflage was no longer about hiding an aircraft from observers on the ground. It was about hiding from the enemy pilot's eye. The lessons did not stop with paint. American tacticians began studying visibility in all its forms. They studied contrails, the long white streaks that sometimes trailed aircraft at high altitude and revealed their position from miles away. They studied formation spacing, measuring how tightly aircraft could fly together before becoming easier to detect. They studied the angle of the sun, teaching pilots how to approach from glare where the enemy would struggle to see them. Gradually, a new philosophy of aerial combat emerged. See first, strike first, disappear again before the enemy can react. The pale gray Mustang became a quiet case study. One pilot's observation tested under fire. One small decision that began spreading through squadrons, airfields, and eventually entire fighter groups. The Germans never fully adapted. Their aircraft continued wearing dark splinter camouflage, greens and grays designed for low-altitude operations. Those colors worked well against forests, farmland, and airfields. But against the pale haze of the upper sky, they made German fighters easy to spot. By the time Luftwaffe commanders realized the disadvantage, the war had already shifted beyond their ability to respond. They lacked the fuel to retrain pilots. They lacked the resources to repaint entire fighter wings. And most of all, they lacked time. By the final year of the war, American fighters dominated the skies over Western Europe. Numbers played a role. Training played a role. Experience played a role. But something smaller contributed as well. American pilots had learned to see first. And the pilot who sees first almost always shoots first. The pale gray Mustangs helped make that possible. They swept ahead of bomber formations, hunting German interceptors before the enemy could organize an attack. They struck from angles that seemed impossible. They attacked from sun glare and cloud shadows. And again, German pilots failed to react until it was too late. The captain's squadron alone would eventually claim over 200 confirmed air-to-air victories between D-Day and the end of the war in Europe. The paint scheme did not win those battles alone, but it helped. The difference was subtle, almost invisible. Yet over months of combat, the results began to accumulate. Pilots flying lighter-colored fighters tended to see their enemies sooner. They tended to survive more often, and they tended to score more victories. In war, even a small advantage becomes powerful when repeated thousands of times. After the war, the lessons remained. The newly formed United States Air Force adopted lighter finishes for many of its fighters. Bare metal skins became common. Later, specialized shades like air superiority gray appeared on jet aircraft. The principle endured through Korea, through Vietnam, and into the Cold War. Technology evolved. Aircraft became faster. Combat ranges grew longer. But the basic idea remained unchanged. Make the enemy's sensors fail. In 1944, that sensor was the human eye. In later decades, it would be radar. Stealth technology, the most advanced aircraft camouflage ever developed, was simply the next step in the same concept. If the enemy cannot detect you, he cannot destroy you. Most history books barely mention the pale gray Mustang. At best, it appears as a footnote, a curious paint experiment, a minor detail in a massive global war. But for the pilots who flew those aircraft, it meant something more. It meant survival. It meant the difference between returning to the airfield and becoming another empty bunk in the barracks. It proved that observation mattered, that questioning old ideas mattered, that sometimes the smallest details could shape the outcome of battles. Years after the war ended, the captain returned to England. He visited the old airfield where he had once flown escort missions over Germany. The runways were still there, cracked now, grass growing through the concrete. The hardstands where fighters once waited for dawn missions sat empty. The control tower stood silent. He walked along the perimeter fence alone, remembering. He remembered the sound of Merlin engines starting in the early morning darkness. He remembered the weight of his flight suit and parachute. He remembered the tension before takeoff, when every pilot wondered whether he would see the runway again. And he remembered the pale gray Mustang, the fighter that had once looked unfinished on the ground, but nearly invisible in the sky. In the 1980s, historians finally tracked him down for interviews. They had spent years studying combat reports and gun camera footage from the 8th Air Force. They wanted to understand how the lighter camouflage had spread. They wanted to know whether the captain had realized what he was doing at the time. He told them the truth. He had not been trying to change doctrine. He had simply been trying to survive. He had noticed a problem. He had guessed at a solution. He had tested it, and it had worked. That was all. The historians showed him their research. They showed him comparisons between squadrons. They showed him changes in survival rates. They showed him estimates suggesting that even a small improvement in visibility might have saved dozens of pilots, possibly hundreds. He listened politely, but he refused to take credit. The paint was just paint, he said. The pilots were the ones who mattered, the ones who flew the missions, the ones who faced the guns and flak. The paint only gave them a chance. In one of his final recorded interviews, he was asked what he hoped people would remember. He thought quietly for a long moment before answering. Then he said something simple. War is made up of thousands of small decisions. Most of them don't matter. But a few do, and you never know which ones until it's over. So you pay attention. You ask questions. You try things. And if you're lucky, you live long enough to see if you were right. Today, the pale gray Mustangs survive mostly in photographs and museums. Some restored aircraft wear the colors at air shows. Model builders recreate them in miniature. Historians occasionally mention them in articles and books. Visitors sometimes stop in front of those aircraft and ask a simple question. Why would anyone paint a fighter plane like that? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because one pilot looked at the sky and realized the enemy was using his aircraft's color against him. Because he refused to accept that the way things had always been done was the way they had to be done. Because he paid attention. His logbook still exists in an archive. 35 missions. 12 confirmed victories. A simple list of dates, targets, and results. The entries never mention the paint experiment. They do not describe the first mission after the repaint. They do not mention the ghost-like fighters that enemy pilots struggled to see. But if you read carefully, you can sense the moment hidden between the lines. The moment when survival stopped being only instinct and started becoming science. The moment camouflage stopped meaning blending into the ground and began meaning disappearing into the sky. The moment when one American pilot asked a question no one else had thought to ask. Where does the sky end? And the fighter begin? He found the answer. He tested it under fire. And he lived to tell the story. Not because he was braver than the others. Not because he was the best shot. But because he paid attention. Because he asked why. Because he refused to believe that old rules could never change. The pale gray Mustang became more than a paint scheme. It became a lesson. A reminder that in war, as in life, The smallest observations can have the largest consequences. That seeing clearly is a weapon. That curiosity can be courage. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to the enemy is very simple. Make him search the sky for you and find nothing but empty air.